In 1629, a Dutch ship carrying 341 people smashed into a reef off the coast of Australia. And that was the good news, because the 40 people who drowned that night were the lucky ones. Over the next 8 weeks, at least 125 of the survivors were murdered. Men, women, and children, not by the sea, not by thirst, but by their own shipmates, working from a list. And on the morning a rescue ship finally appeared, 2 boats hit the water at once, rowing like the sea was on fire. The killers in one, the last honest men alive in the other. Whoever touched that ship first would tell the story. Whoever lost would hang. None of this is legend. It is written in the Dutch East India Company's own court records. Confessions, sentences, names. This is the story of the Batavia, and it begins with a mutiny that was already aboard before the Reef ever found her. Day 0, 341 souls. The Batavia is the pride of the Dutch East India Company, brand new, on her maiden voyage, carrying 12 chests of silver coin toward the spice ports of Java. She is, in this moment, one of the richest ships on any ocean, and she is already rotting from the inside, because 2 men aboard have decided the silver shouldn't reach Java at all. The skipper, Ration Jacobs, a hard, brilliant sailor nursing a humiliation from an old voyage, and the under-merchant, Jeronimus Cornelisz, a soft-spoken, failed apothecary who signed onto this ship to outrun heresy charges back home. Together, in whispered watches, they build a mutiny, recruit the toughest men, seize the ship, take the silver, vanish into piracy. They even set their trap. A storm off the Cape of Good Hope separates the Batavia from her escort fleet, and Jacobs makes sure she stays separated, steering her alone into empty ocean. Then the conspirators stage a vicious nighttime assault on the ship's most high-born woman passenger. Bait, designed to provoke the commander into mass punishments that would light the fuse of mutiny. But the ocean got there first. 4 in the morning, June 4th, 1629, the lookout sees white water ahead and calls it moonlight on the waves. It isn't. It's surf, breaking on a coral reef no Dutch chart has ever named. The Batavia drives onto it at full sail and stops forever. By sunrise, some 40 people have drowned in the dark, and the survivors are being ferried to a scrap of coral so bare the Dutch will come to call it Batavia's graveyard. 180 people, one small island, no fresh water, and the most dangerous man aboard isn't among them yet. Jeronimus Cornelisz cannot swim. He is still out on the dying wreck, and he will cling to it for 9 more days. When he finally comes ashore, everything changes. Day 2, 180 alive, on a rock with no water. Put yourself there for a moment. You survived the reef. You spent the night listening to the wreck grind itself apart in the dark. And at first light, you walk the shoreline, looking for the commander, for orders, for a plan, for anyone in charge. And you find footprints leading to an empty beach. The longboat is gone. Commander Pelsart, Skipper Jacobs, every senior officer, and more than 40 of the strongest sailors slipped away in the night. No announcement, no goodbye. They took the biggest boat, most of the instruments, and left 180 men, women, and children on a bare coral shelf with a few barrels of water and no one above the rank of a sick under-merchant still clinging to the wreck offshore. Now, here's where this story splits in two, and historians still argue about which half to believe. Because what Pelsart did next is one of the greatest feats of seamanship ever recorded. In an open boat barely 10 meters long, He crossed more than 900 nautical miles of uncharted ocean, 33 days, rationing water by the cup, along a coastline no European had ever mapped, and reached the Dutch port of Java alive. He never stopped intending to come back. By the cold mathematics of the sea, going for help was the only move that could save anyone. But mathematics is not what the people on Batavia's graveyard woke up to. They woke up to abandonment, and a crowd that believes it has been left to die stops trusting rank, stops trusting rules, and starts looking for someone, anyone, who sounds certain. The islands now had no law, no leader, and no water. Within days, one of those three problems would be solved by the worst man alive. Day 11. The wreck of the Batavia finally breaks apart, and the last man aboard washes ashore clinging to a piece of the bowsprit. Jeronimus Cornelisz cannot swim. He has spent 9 days alone on a disintegrating ship, and he staggers onto Batavia's graveyard, half drowned, into the arms of 180 desperate people looking for anyone in authority. And he is the highest-ranking company man left. The island belongs to him. Understand who just took power. A failed apothecary from Harlem, bankrupt, on the run from heresy charges, a follower of a banned philosophy he had twisted into something bottomless, the belief that everything he did was placed in him by God, and therefore nothing he did could be sin. Not theft, not mutiny, not murder. The most dangerous idea on earth, wearing the company's uniform, marooned with an island of trusting survivors. And watch how carefully he moves. No violence, not yet. He forms a council, all legal, all proper. He collects every weapon on the island for safekeeping. He seizes the remaining boats and rafts for orderly rationing. Within days, 180 people have handed total control to the calmest voice among them, and most of them feel grateful. Then, the masterstroke. The one group that could stop him, 20-odd trained soldiers, led by a common private named Wiebbe Hayes, are ferried 8 kilometers away to a distant island, stripped of their weapons, with cheerful orders: search for fresh water, light 3 fires if you find it. Cornelisz has studied the charts. He believes that island is dry. He believes he has just sentenced every soldier to death by thirst, without lifting a blade. He had just made the only mistake that would ever matter. But for now, the killing could begin. Day 20. 141 alive. And for the first time, that number is not an accident. It's a decision. It begins quietly, the way it always does. The water ration is recalculated. A raft carrying the sick capsizes at night. A tragedy. A man accused of stealing supplies is tried by the council and executed. That's not murder, that's law. Every death arrives wearing paperwork, and on Cornelisz's table sits the real document, the roll of survivors, marked and remarked in his neat merchant's hand, who is useful, who is loyal, and who is simply drinking water he has decided belongs to him. Then the paperwork stops pretending. A nearby islet holds 45 survivors. Too many, too separate, too hard to watch. Cornelisz sends his men across in the boats one night, and by morning, that island is silent. Men, women, children. He never swings a blade himself. He never has to. He has assembled a crew of killers, some willing, some terrified into it, and bound every one of them to him with a signed oath of loyalty. Sign, and you're one of them, complicit forever. Refuse, and your name moves to the other column of the list. So, be honest with me in the comments. It's day 20. You've heard what happens after dark. You have a family name, maybe a family, and they put that oath and a pen in front of you. Do you sign? I genuinely want to know, because every person on that island faced exactly that question, and history recorded both answers. And then, on the horizon where nothing was supposed to happen, Cornelisz sees it. Smoke, 3 fires, burning in a row on the soldiers' island. The signal he ordered as a joke. The men he sent to die of thirst found water, and Jeronimus Cornelisz stands at the shoreline, understanding the arithmetic in one cold instant. He hasn't exiled his enemies. He's armed them with the only thing on these islands worth fighting for. Day 23. On the soldiers' island, they know none of it. They found water, real wells, hidden under slabs of rock. They found food, small wallabies, birds' eggs, fish in the shallows. 22 men, eating better than anyone in the archipelago, waiting proudly beside their signal fires for boats that never come. Then, one night, the sea gives them the truth. A figure comes out of the black water, barely alive, a survivor who slipped past the killers and swam the channel between the islands. Kilometers of night ocean, in water where sharks hunt, with no light and no margin, because staying meant dying anyway. He collapses on their beach and gasps out everything. The lists, the oath, the silent islands, they are murdering everyone, and you are next. Wiebbe Hayes, a common soldier, no officer, no title, listens. And then he does something no one on these islands has done since the wreck. He prepares. His men stack slabs of coral limestone into walls, a crude square redoubt on the flattest ground, the first European structure ever raised on Australian soil. They have not one gun between them, so they make pikes from driftwood and barrel hoops, clubs studded with nails, and they drill like the professional soldiers they are, because Cornelisz must come. The soldiers hold the water, and now they know his secret. Stand on that beach for a moment, you, a sharpened stick in your hands, watching boats full of musketmen row toward you across the morning. The first assault hits the shallows and breaks. Trained men with pikes, fighting in formation, throw the killers back into the sea. Weeks later, the second assault comes. It breaks too. So for the third attempt, Cornelisz brings his real weapon, his voice, a truce, a negotiation, blankets and wine for water. He steps ashore to sweet-talk a common soldier, and the common soldier outplays him. Hayes' men seize Cornelisz alive, mid-sentence, but the mutineers still have the muskets, a new commander, and one assault left. And as the first shots of the final battle crack across the water, a sail rises on the horizon. Now you know why both sides started rowing.
Harder, men, pull!
September 17th, 1629, day 105 since the wreck. The Sardam, Pelsart's rescue ship, drops anchor among the islands, and the race you watched at the very start of this video is now run for real. 2 boats hammering across the same stretch of water. The mutineers dressed in embroidered finery, looted from the wreck, rowing to reach the ship first and take her at the rail. And a small yawl carrying 4 soldiers, rowing for the truth. Hayes wins by minutes, and we know exactly what he said, because Pelsart wrote it into his journal that same day. A man leaps from the yawl, runs up the sand and shouts, "Welcome, but go back aboard immediately. There is a party of scoundrels on the islands near the wreck, with 2 sloops, who intend to seize the yacht." Minutes later, when the mutineers' boat pulls alongside in its stolen silk, it finds every gun on the Sardam already trained on it. The men who murdered an archipelago surrender without a shot, undone by a rowing race. What follows may be the strangest courtroom in history. A full company tribunal, convened on a coral beach, at the edge of the known world. Under Dutch law, the interrogations are brutal, and the confessions come. One soldier, Jan Hendricks, admits, in words Pelsart copied down, to killing or helping to kill 17 to 20 people. All of it, he insists, under Jeronimus's orders. Asked why, the answers circle the same drain. He ordered it. He said it was necessary. He said it was no sin. The sentences matched the crimes. On October 2nd, 1629, on a scrap of coral the Dutch called Seal Island, the worst of the mutineers hang. Several with their right hands struck off first. Cornelisz loses both hands before the rope. They are the first Europeans ever executed on Australian soil, and the continent's first gallows was built for them from the wreckage of their own ship. Two of the youngest are spared the rope for a stranger fate, rowed to the unknown mainland and marooned, making a teenage murderer and his companion, by accident, the first European residents of Australia. And the lesser mutineers? They're punished on the voyage home by keel hauling, a ritual you already know from this channel, dragged beneath the hull, through the barnacles, while the crew watches. The company thought that was the end of the story. The sand of Beacon Island disagreed. Final count. Of the 341 souls who sailed on the Batavia, roughly 116 ever reached the city she was named for. The sea took 40 of them. Everything after that, every single loss, was a choice, made by men, on dry land, under a merchant's neat handwriting. Wiebbe Hayes, the common soldier with the Driftwood Pikes, was promoted on the spot, a private, raised to sergeant, for outthinking a psychopath with nothing but discipline and coral stone. And then, like so many honest men in this story, he sails out of the record entirely. History kept the monster's name and lost the hero's ending. Sit with that for a second. But this story refused to stay buried. In 1963, divers found her, the Batavia herself, still lying on the reef that killed her. And they didn't just find her, they raised her. A whole section of her actual hull, timber by timber, stands today in a museum in Fremantle, Western Australia. You can walk up to the planks that Cornelisz clung to for 9 days. Beside them sits a stone portico she was carrying as cargo, and one of the skeletons the islands gave back. Because the islands are still giving them back. On Beacon Island, Batavia's graveyard, archaeologists with brushes are, to this day, lifting the murdered out of the sand, one careful centimeter at a time. Mass graves, single graves, a family lying together. Nearly 4 centuries later, the victims are still being counted. And out on the Soldiers' Island, something else still stands. A low square of stacked coral slabs, weathered but unbroken. Wiebbe Hayes' fort, the oldest European structure on the entire continent of Australia, built not to conquer anything, but to say no. The sea killed 40 people that night in 1629. Everything after that was a choice. Some men chose the list. 22 chose the wall. And if you want to know what happened to the mutineers who escaped the rope, the ones dragged beneath a ship's hull on the voyage home, that punishment has its own story, and it's already on your screen. It was the one sailors feared more than death.